Hi guys! Today we're going to read a story called Make Way for Ducklings. It's about a mommy and a daddy duck trying to take care of their ducklings. And it is by Robert McCloskey. Mr. and Mrs. Mallard were looking for a place to live, but every time Mr. Mallard saw what looked like a nice place, Mrs. Mallard said it was no good. There were sure to be foxes in the woods or turtles in the water, and she was not going to raise a family where there might be foxes or turtles. So on and on they flew. When they got to Boston, they felt too tired to fly anymore. There was a nice pond in the public garden with a little island in it. The very place to spend the night, quacked Mr. Mallard. So down they flapped. The next morning they fished for breakfast in the mud at the bottom of the pond, but they didn't find much. Look at those silly ducks fishing. Just as they were getting ready to start on their way, a strange, enormous bird came by. It was pushing a boat full of people, and there was a man sitting on its back. "Good morning," quacked Mr. Mallard, being polite. The big bird was too proud to answer, but the people on the boat threw peanuts in the water, so the Mallards followed them all the way around the pond and got another breakfast, better than the first. Is that a real bird there? No. "I like this place," said Mrs. Mallard as they climbed out of the bank and waddled along. "Why don't we build a nest and raise our ducklings right in this pond? There are no foxes and no turtles, and the people fed us peanuts. What could be better?" "Good," said Mr. Mallard, delighted that at last Mrs. Mallard had found a place that suited her. But, what do you think's going to happen? "Look out!" squawked Mrs. Mallard, all in a dither. "You'll get run over." And then she got under her breath. She added, "This is no place for babies, with those horrid things pushing about. We have to look somewhere else." Look at that. The boy on the bicycle almost ran them over. So they flew over to Beacon Hill and around the State House, but there was no place there. They looked over Luxembourg Square, but there was no water to swim in. Then they flew over the Charles River. "This is better," quacked Mr. Mallard. "That island looks like a nice quiet place, and it's only a little way from the public gardens." "Yes," said Mrs. Mallard, remembering the peanuts. "It looks like just the right place to hatch some ducklings." So they chose a cozy spot among the bushes near the water and settled down to build their nest. And only just in time, for they were beginning to molt. All their old wing feathers started to drop out, and they would not be able to fly again until the new ones grew in. Look, you see their little nest? But of course they could swim, and one day they swam over to the park on the riverbank, and there they met a policeman named Michael. Michael fed them peanuts, and after that, the Mallards called on Michael every day. After Mrs. Mallard had laid 8 eggs in the nest, she couldn't go visit Michael anymore because she had to sit on the eggs to keep them warm. She moved off the nest only to get a drink of water or to have her lunch or to count the eggs and make sure they were all there. There's the mama duck. One day the ducklings hatched out. First came Jack, then Cack, then Lack, then Mack, then Knack, then Quack, then Pack, and Quack. Mr. and Mrs. Mallard were bursting with pride. It was a great responsibility to take care of so many ducklings, and it kept them very busy. Have you ever seen any baby ducks down by the Hudson River? This time of year you might. One day Mr. Mallard decided he'd take a trip to see what the rest of the river was like further on. So off he set. I'll meet you in a week in the public garden. Take good care of the ducklings. Don't you worry. I know all about bringing up children. And she did. She taught them how to swim and to dive. She taught them how to walk in a line, to come when they were called, and to keep a safe distance from the bikes and scooters and the other things with wheels. When at last she felt perfectly satisfied with them, she said one morning, "Come along, children, follow me." And before you could wink an eyelash, Jack, Cack, Lack, Mack, Knack, Whack, Pack, and Quack fell in line, just as they had been taught. Mrs. Mallard led them into the water, and they swam behind her to the opposite bank. Then they waded ashore and waddled along till they came to a highway. Mrs. Mallard stepped off to cross the road. Honk, honk went the horns of the speeding cars. Quack went Mrs. Mallard as she tumbled back. Quack, quack! Quack, 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 quack! Went Jack, Cack, Lack, Mack, Knack, Whack, Pack, and Quack, just as loud as their little quackers could quack. The cars kept speeding by and honking, and Mrs. Mallard and the ducklings kept right on quack, 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 quacking. They made such a noise that Michael came running, waving his arms and blowing his whistle. He planted himself in the center of the road, raised one hand to stop the traffic, and then beckoned with the other, the way policemen do, for Mrs. Mallard to cross. As soon as Mrs. Mallard and the ducklings were safe on the other side of the road and on their way to Mount Vernon Street, Michael rushed back to his police booth. He called Clancy at headquarters and said, "There's a family of ducks walking down the street." "A family of what?" "Ducks," yelled Michael. "Send a police car quick." Meanwhile, Mrs. Mallard had reached the corner bookshop and turned onto Charles Street with Jack, Cack, Lack, Mack, Knack, Whack, Pack, and Quack, all marching in a line behind her. Everyone stared. An old lady from Beacon Hill said, "Why, isn't that amazing?" And the man who swept the street corner said, "Well, now ain't that nice?" And when Mrs. Mallard heard them, she was so proud she tipped her nose into the air and walked along with an extra swing in her waddle. When they came to the corner of Beacon Street, there was a police car with 4 policemen that Clancy had sent from headquarters. The policemen held back the traffic so that Mrs. Mallard and the ducklings could march along the street. Look, there they are, marching in the street. Right into the public gardens. Inside the gate, they all turned round to say thank you to the policeman. The policeman smiled and waved goodbye. When they reached the pond and swam across to the little island, there was Mr. Mallard waiting for them. Look, there he is. There they are swimming. The ducklings liked the new island so much they decided to live there. All day long they follow the swan boats and they eat peanuts. And when the night falls, they swim to their little island and they fall asleep. The end. What a smart mama duck. She took such good care of her babies. Maybe you can make sure to help take care of your mama. Bye.